so nervous before a review. We are going to be taking a look at an extremely exciting, extremely yellow whiskey. This is a Scotch known as the Bruichladdich. I hope that I'm rolling my R's appropriately, which is definitely not something you do in Scotland, but nevertheless, here we are. The Islay Barley 2010 of the Bruichladdich. Now, this one is pretty interesting, and I'll tell you what, as far as Scotches go, they have got a lot of story on this one. I'm talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs of backstory. Let's just read a very, very brief synopsis of what this is all about, according to them on the package itself. Every year, the crops that bend to Atlantic storms alongside the farmers' traditional herds of rugged beef cattle are distilled separately, but strong growth through a gentle June and July was threatened by relentless August rain. Guys, those rains of August can be very, very harsh. As the grain slowly ripened, flocks of wild geese, right on the package, we're getting into geese. It is bottled at 6 years old. We'll come back to that. To preserve the nuances of the grain and celebrate the fascinating characteristics of the evocative single harvest. Now, if you're like me when you read this and you looked at 2010, the first thing you were thinking about was, wait, 6 years old? What's going on here? When you are talking about a Scotch, you actually are talking about two distinct flavor profiles, and they operate on a continuum, right? So when you are first distilling the Scotch, and it's actually totally clear, there's no color to it at all, what you actually have are the purest flavors of the barley and the water. And that's what's flavoring your Scotch at that point. Obviously, you then put it into, as they're saying, American oak casks, once used generally in almost all Scotch, but there's been a lot of experimentation around that. Once you put them in that and you start maturing it year over year over year, what you're actually getting is more flavor of the barrel and of the charring. And that's also where you get your coloration. So if you look at these spectrums of Scotches, you see these ones that are incredibly light, those are very young, and you see the ones that are very, very, very dark, those are the ones that are old. Now, it's a common misconception that the ones that are older have more flavor. Not true. They have more flavor from the charring and from the barrel, but they actually have slightly less of a flavor profile from the barley and the water. So, if you are a distillery like Bruichladdich, you actually are going to favor younger Scotches most often, and that's because you're actually imbuing more of the flavor of the land and of the water, what they would call the terroir of the Scotch. You're imbuing much more of that into the finished product. So they try to strike a fine balance between getting it in the barrel and having it age to that optimum flavor profile where you're not losing that kind of core element of the barley, but you're actually imbuing it directly into the Scotch. So that's a lot of the backstory, that's a lot of kind of the elements of why I've chosen this one, why this Scotch is how it is, and kind of maybe giving me a little bit of a hint to the flavor profile itself. But let's go ahead and unbox it. This is actually a pretty amazing bottle. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Do you see this? Do you see this? Somebody's been getting into the reviewing whiskey. Somebody's been getting into the reviewing whiskey.
Cheers!
Who been drinking this whiskey?
Cheers!
I think it might have been me. I think I got into the reviewing whiskey last night. Folks, I have to apologize to you. This is not a brand new unboxing. I got into the reviewing whiskey just the evening prior. This is a whiskey where when you set it out, people are going to look at it. They're not going to look at it as a traditional bottle. It actually doesn't even look like one. It frankly looks a lot more, just in terms of style and shape, but much more similar to the American bourbon bottles. But this whiskey, again, having already spoiled it the night before, I can tell you, overperforms. And it even overperforms for the price point, which for me in Texas and the United States is right around the $70 range. So I think that it actually goes a bit beyond that in terms of performance. So we're talking a whole hell of a lot. Let's go ahead and start tasting it. Let me tell you how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do 2 different preparations for serving, this being Scotch. I'm going to do one neat, and then I'm going to do one with a splash of water. And I'm going to taste them each. I'm going to go through 2 separate tasting processes for each one. The first, I'm going to nose, and then I'll describe the mouthfeel, the finish, the flavor profile, all of that. We'll then go through the entire process yet again with a little splash of water, which is the traditional preparation of Scotch, no ice. This is going to be the full tasting of the Bruichladdich. All right, so we have our 2 different preparations. This one, entirely neat, nothing added to it. Straight from the bottle into the glass. This, little splash of water, maybe 3/4 of a shot. That way I can potentially see if it opens it up a little more. Does it impact the overall flavor? Does it impact the overall profile? We're gonna get into all of that in just a second. So, let's start with the completely neat Scotch delivered directly from the distillery. Okay? A little bit of a swirl. So, let's see what we're getting off of this one. Again, this is the completely neat. Yeah, this one to me, I am getting a ton of honey, and I'm getting a ton of oat. It actually tastes a little bit, or smells a little bit like, there's a little citrus as well. It's like if you squeezed an orange rind over a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios. That's kind of what I'm getting off of this initial one. It's a little bit sharp. There's a touch of that alcohol astringency. I think that's kind of appearing much more in the citrus, but yeah, that's what I'm getting off of it. It's a very bright flavor, and I'm curious as to whether or not the water is going to kind of dull that out at all. One more. Yeah. One more little sip. Yeah. It's extremely nice. Right away I can tell you that I would like it a little bit more with water or an ice cube. I say that because when you drink it like this, when you taste it like this, you can tell, I mean, I talked about the importance of finding the flavors on the nose. You can tell that honey's there. You know, you can tell that kind of oatiness, that richness, that maltiness is all there, and it's delicious, frankly. But that astringency, that brassiness, that's also there too. And actually, when you take a big sip of this, like I just did twice, you feel it, right? Now, you'll describe that as a warming sensation. I would too. It's a very warm Scotch. It's a very comforting, friendly Scotch. It's actually one, despite it being an Islay, it's one that I would recommend to a new Scotch drinker who's trying to get a little bit more of that smoky profile without going like full peat. But I can tell right now that this one is going to benefit greatly from a little splash of water or an ice cube. Now, we'll talk about the Scotch with water. Let's get the nose on it. Yeah. And by the way, you see what I'm doing on this one. I can actually really get my nose all the way in there. And this one, all that kind of astringent brightness, which again is not entirely unpleasant, that's gone. Now I'm left purely with the flavor profile that I think is what they blended it for, and I think is what they distilled it for. So actually, if you're drinking it, no shame at all, no harm at all in drinking it neat. I will drink this neat all day long, and in fact, I think that might be one of my preferred preparations, or with a thick ice cube that melts slowly, so it's neat and then kind of mellows out over time. With that little bit of water, it opens it up so much. It actually significantly changes the flavor profile. I'm getting so much more of that honey side of the flavor. It's still the same ones, right? it's still the same honey. It's still that same oatiness. It's that kind of like honey nut Cheerio with a little splash of citrus orange. This is a little bit more lemony than orangey actually than the other one. But the difference is, rather than having all of those flavors just punch, 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 they've all been blended. It all mixes beautifully into one drink that actually is much more homogeneous. Speaking of tasting it, let's actually do that. That is just incredibly pleasant. And it's multi-dimensional. Here's the thing that's interesting. When you're drinking this with the water that opens it up just a little bit, it changes it significantly. I've already mentioned how it changes the aroma, the profile. What it also does is it adds phases to the drink itself. So, with this one that was completely neat, you drink it, and again, it's a little bit of a 1-2 punch. 1-2-3 punch. The oat, the honey, and the citrus. Really kind of hits you in the face. And it's all at once, right? You notice every one of those flavors. That's not a bad thing, by the way. If you love scotch, you love whiskey, you love just the pure, unadulterated, which I do, by the way, the pure, unadulterated, this is how it comes out of the bottle, you know, I don't give a damn about how you're supposed to drink it. This is how it came, I'm going to drink it like this. This one's going to give you everything right up front. Punchy. This one is going to come much more in phases. You take a sip of this, initially, you get that little bit of the orangey, lemony citrus that I've been talking about. Then you get the honey. I think if you were gonna, I keep coming back to this, an artisanal honey nut Cheerio, which I'm sure, you know, is an insult to the entirety of Islay and Scotland, but that's what I think. It's an artisanal honey nut Cheerio is what you're getting off of this one. And the finish, just to recap, you get that citrus on the mask. You get that little bit of the honey, the lavender on the palate, and then when you drink it, it lingers. This one has a long finish. It tastes of that oat flavor. You really get that barley. This is something where you can really truly tell that a lot of effort was put into getting that specific part of the distillation right. And the reason, by the way, going back to the very beginning of the video, is that this is a younger whiskey fundamentally. So you're gonna get a lot more of that. I'm not getting a lot of smoke off of this. It's an Islay. You know, generally I think Islay, I'm thinking peat, I'm thinking smoke, I'm thinking like that fieriness. It's not that much of that. If you're looking for that, I would go for another Islay. In fact, they have some of the Bruichladdich that are extra peated. You go for that. You're gonna have something that really kind of kicks you with that smokiness. I love those. I'm gonna be going back for that. This one, no. To say that it's easy drinking is almost a little bit of an insult to it, because when I hear easy drinking, I think not complex. Well, this is not one-dimensional, it's complex. I'm not doing it justice by telling you the flavor profiles that I'm getting. I'm giving you the ones that are the most heavy-hitting for me, but you could take any one of those apart. It's gonna open up so much differently, and this is why the subjectivity of tasting is so important. You know, you're gonna be getting different elements of that. I do believe that you're gonna be getting those elements, those citrus elements. I do believe you're gonna get that honey. I do believe you're gonna get that oaty, barley, just deliciousness. But it's all gonna be subjective. It's all gonna be completely tied to you. If you care about the terroir of a whiskey, if you care about where it comes from, the people who till the fields, if you care about the water, the sources, all of those sorts of things, if you are priding yourself on getting a whiskey that comes from a specific region with a specific methodology of preparation, you're probably going to want a younger one, because that's where you're really going to get those flavors, fundamentally. I hope that you've enjoyed this review. I certainly have enjoyed giving it. I hope to give a lot more, and I hope that you'll join me. Let me ask you a question before I sign off. If you are a fan of Scotch, specifically if you're a fan of Islay, what's the age range that you generally go for? And why? Are you generally a 12-year person? Are you single malt? Do you go for blended? Do you care about age if you're going blended? Let me know. Let me know in the comments. I'd ask you to subscribe to the channel. I'd ask you to join our Facebook page, facebook.com/cigarandwhiskey. I hope that I'm helping you enjoy the finest in smoke and drink. Thank you.